Nestled between rolling hills and lined with perfectly manicured lawns, Maplewood Grove was the kind of neighborhood that felt like it had leaped from the pages of a storybook. The tree-lined streets were adorned with charming houses, each painted in soft pastels and boasting flower-filled gardens that seemed to bloom year-round. It was a community where everyone knew each other's names, and weekend barbecues were a common sight, with laughter and the smell of grilled burgers wafting through the air. At the heart of this idyllic setting was the Homeowners Association, or HOA, a governing body that promised to maintain the neighborhood's charm and uphold its standards. While many residents appreciated the HOA's efforts to keep everything looking pristine, it also meant that certain individuals took their responsibilities to heart, often too much so. Among them was Karen, a woman whose reputation preceded her. With her clipboard in hand and a keen eye for detail, she patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk, ensuring that every blade of grass stood at attention and that no fence dared to stray from the approved height. Karen was known for her strict adherence to HOA rules, often confronting her neighbors about minor infractions. A slightly unkempt lawn, a violation, a flower bed overflowing with blooms, an eyesore. To her, the rules were not just guidelines, they were an unwavering code of conduct that everyone must follow. This made her both feared and oddly respected within the community, a kind of necessary evil in maintaining Maplewood Grove's polished image. However, this self-appointed role came with its own set of challenges. While some residents tried to coexist peacefully with Karen's zealous enforcement, others found themselves at odds with her over what they perceived as petty grievances. It was this fine line between order and chaos that set the stage for an impending conflict, one that would ultimately lead to an unforeseen disaster involving a beloved tree, an angry Karen, and a moment of reckoning that no one in Maplewood Grove would soon forget. In the backyard of the protagonist's charming home stood an imposing oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like the arms of an old friend. This towering giant was not just a fixture on the property, it was a cherished part of the family's history. Planted years ago by the protagonist's late father, the tree had grown alongside them, witnessing countless memories and milestones. From summer picnics beneath its shade to winter gatherings where it served as the perfect backdrop for holiday decorations, the oak had become a symbol of love, resilience, and tradition. As seasons changed, so did the tree. In spring, it burst forth with vibrant green leaves that danced in the gentle breeze, offering a sanctuary for chirping birds and playful squirrels. During summer, its sprawling canopy provided a cool refuge from the sweltering sun, a favorite spot for children to play and adults to relax with a good book. Fall transformed it into a spectacle of fiery hues, reds, oranges, and yellows, drawing the admiration of neighbors and passers-by alike. Even in winter, when its branches stood bare against the stark white snow, it retained an air of majesty that reminded everyone of nature's cycles. The tree's health was apparent. Its sturdy trunk and abundant foliage spoke volumes about its vitality. Regular care had ensured it remained strong and vibrant over the years. The protagonist took pride in maintaining it, nurturing its roots and keeping the surrounding area tidy. It was more than just an ornamental feature. It was an integral part of their identity and a connection to their past. However, this bond would soon be tested. Karen's watchful eye had zeroed in on the oak tree, deeming its branches encroaching on what she believed was her territory. To her, it was just another violation of HOA rules, an infringement that needed correction. But to the protagonist, it was so much more than that. It represented family ties and cherished memories. Little did they know that this beloved tree would soon become central to an unfolding conflict that would shake Maplewood Grove to its core. Karen had become a fixture in Maplewood Grove, known to residents as much for her meticulous attention to detail as for her unwavering commitment to enforcing the HOA rules. With her short, cropped hair and an ever-present frown, she resembled a school principal on a mission, one who had little patience for anything that fell outside the lines of her defined order. Her reputation as the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA regulations preceded her, and tales of her confrontations spread like wildfire through neighborhood gossip. Previous encounters with Karen had left many residents shaken. There was the time she knocked on Mrs. Thompson's door over a single dandelion in her otherwise pristine lawn, insisting it was a blight on community standards. Or the moment she confronted the Johnsons about their choice of fence color, declaring it distracting and inappropriate for the neighborhood's aesthetic. Each encounter seemed to escalate quickly, often leaving residents feeling frustrated and powerless against a relentless scrutiny. Even the most minor infractions did not escape Karen's hawk-like gaze. If someone dared to leave their trash cans out past collection day, she would be there with her camera phone, capturing evidence for the next HOA meeting. It wasn't uncommon for neighbors to joke about Karen's clipboard being an extension of her arm, always ready to jot down notes or complaints about whatever she deemed unacceptable. Despite some residents' exasperation, others found themselves begrudgingly respecting Karen's commitment to maintaining the neighborhood's image. They believed that without her vigilance, Maplewood Grove could quickly slip into disarray. Yet, this respect was often overshadowed by fear. No one wanted to become Karen's next target. As summer approached and outdoor activities began in earnest, tension simmered beneath the surface. The protagonist had witnessed firsthand how Karen's obsession with rules had turned friendly, neighborly interactions into battlegrounds over aesthetics and compliance. Little did they know that this time, it would be their beloved oak tree that would draw Karen's ire, setting off a chain of events that would lead to an explosive showdown between community standards and personal ties. The tension between the protagonist and Karen began to escalate like a summer storm, brewing quietly at first before unleashing its fury. It all started with a single note, neatly typed and slipped into the mailbox one unsuspecting afternoon. Karen had pinned her complaints about the oak tree, claiming its branches were overhanging her property line. As the protagonist read the note, a mix of confusion and indignation bubbled up inside them. Wasn't a little shade of fair trade for living next to something so majestic? In the days that followed, Karen's grievances grew bolder. She began stopping by more frequently, her clipboard in hand, making pointed remarks about how the tree was an eyesore and how it could potentially damage her property. The protagonist, who had always viewed their home as a sanctuary, found themselves on edge. Each encounter felt like an unwelcome invasion, and Karen's relentless complaints turned what was once a peaceful coexistence into a battlefield of words. One evening, after returning home from work, the protagonist noticed Karen lurking by the fence, peering intently at the oak tree as if it were a guilty criminal. Unable to suppress their irritation any longer, they approached her. "Can I help you with something?" they asked, trying to keep their tone even. Karen wasted no time launching into her latest tirade. "Look at those branches. They're practically reaching into my yard," she exclaimed, pointing dramatically as if she were unveiling evidence in a courtroom. "You need to do something about it before it becomes an even bigger issue." The protagonist felt their frustration boil over. "It's an oak tree. It's healthy and beautiful. Why can't you just appreciate it instead of trying to make me cut it down?" Their voice rose slightly, echoing the tension that had been building for weeks. The confrontation drew the attention of several neighbors who had been watching this drama unfold from their porches. As words flew back and forth, lines were drawn, sides were taken. The protagonist couldn't believe it had come to this. The simple tree was now a point of contention that threatened both community harmony and personal peace. With emotions running high and voices raised, it was clear that this dispute was far from over, setting the stage for even greater conflict ahead. One crisp morning, the sun rose over Maplewood Grove, casting a golden light that seemed to promise a new day. But for Karen, it was not just any day. It was the day she decided to take matters into her own hands. Frustrated by the ongoing dispute and emboldened by her conviction that she was acting in the neighborhood's best interest, she hatched a plan to resolve the issue once and for all. After breakfast, Karen donned her work gloves and gathered tools from her shed, a saw, some rope, and a sturdy ladder. She had made up her mind. She would cut the branches of the oak tree herself. In her mind, this act wasn't just justified. It was necessary. "If I don't do something about this tree, it could eventually cause damage," she rationalized to herself. "I'm saving myself and protecting my property." The HOA's rules were paramount in her worldview, and in her eyes, she was merely enforcing them. As she crept onto the protagonist's property, Karen felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with a sense of righteousness. She knew that trespassing was against the law, but her obsession with order drowned out any voice of reason. With no one around to witness her actions, she set up her ladder against the sturdy trunk of the oak. Each step she took felt like a step toward reclaiming control over what she believed was a chaotic situation. Once on the ladder, she started sawing at the branches with determination, convinced that this was the only way to restore peace in the neighborhood. The sound of the saw slicing through would echo in the stillness, yet there was an eerie calm surrounding her as if nature itself held its breath. But as the branches began to fall, so did Karen's sense of invincibility. She hadn't considered how precarious her actions were or the potential repercussions they might bring. What started as an attempt to assert dominance over a minor nuisance quickly spiraled into recklessness. With each branch that hit the ground, the weight of consequences loomed larger. Unbeknownst to her, fate had other plans in store that would soon turn this act of defiance into an unexpected disaster. The morning air was filled with an unsettling stillness when the protagonist stepped outside, ready to enjoy a cup of coffee in the comfort of their backyard. But as they turned the corner, their heart dropped. The oak tree, once a proud sentinel of their yard, lay wounded. Branches that had adorned its majestic form now lay scattered on the ground, and a deep sense of betrayal washed over them like a cold wave. At first, disbelief took hold. "This can't be happening," they whispered, scanning the area for any sign of what had transpired. It didn't take long for reality to sink in. The sight of Karen's ladder still leaning against the trunk, a stark reminder of her audacity, sent a surge of anger through the protagonist. How could she have done this? With no permission, no warning, and no regard for the memories tied to that tree? Rushing inside, they grabbed their phone to call Karen, but a nagging feeling held them back. Instead, they stormed into their front yard, where several neighbors were already gathering, drawn by the commotion. Whispers and gasps echoed as others processed the scene before them. The oak tree was not just a tree. It was a beloved part of Maplewood Grove's character. As neighbors approached, some offered sympathetic words while others expressed outrage at Karen's unilateral decision. "I can't believe she would do something so reckless," one neighbor exclaimed, shaking their head in disbelief. Another chimed in, "This isn't just about property lines. It's about respect." Eyes turned toward the protagonist, who struggled to find words amidst the emotional turmoil. When Karen eventually emerged from her house, she wore an expression of defiance mixed with a hint of smugness. It had to be done, she insisted, her voice firm yet unconvincing in light of the gathering crowd. The backlash was immediate. People rallied around the protagonist, voicing their support and condemning Karen's actions. As tensions simmered in the air, it became clear that this incident would not simply fade away. It had ignited a firestorm of opinions and emotions that would only escalate further. The community's reaction solidified what had started as a personal grievance into a larger conflict that threatened to change the dynamics of Maplewood Grove forever. In the days following the shocking incident, an unsettling quiet settled over Maplewood Grove. The oak tree, once a bastion of strength and beauty, now stood vulnerable, its remaining branches swaying precariously in the wind. Weakened by the hasty cuts Karen had made, the tree's stability was compromised, creating a sense of foreboding that hung thick in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. For the protagonist, each passing moment felt heavy with dread. They couldn't shake the image of the tree, once a source of joy and memories, now marred and exposed. As they gazed at the remaining limbs, questions raced through their mind. Would it withstand the next storm? How much more could it endure before succumbing to its injuries? Each gust of wind elicited a shiver down their spine, a physical reminder that nature was unpredictable. Meanwhile, Karen continued her routine, seemingly unperturbed by the consequences of her actions. Yet beneath her facade of confidence lay an undercurrent of anxiety. She often glanced at the tree from her porch, a nagging feeling gnawing at her conscience. Had she truly assessed the risks? Each time she heard a branch crack or rustle in the breeze, her heart raced with apprehension. The thought that she might have unwittingly set in motion a disaster weighed heavily on her mind. As twilight approached one evening, shadows grew longer and darker around the neighborhood. The air turned thick with tension as residents sensed something was amiss. The oak tree creaked ominously under the weight of its reduced structure, and small branches began to tremble as if warning all who were near. The protagonist felt an instinctive tug to check on their beloved tree once more, a palpable pull that seemed to whisper for attention. That night, clouds gathered overhead, darkening the sky and promising rain. Thunder rumbled in the distance like a growling beast, and flashes of lightning illuminated the tree's jagged silhouette against the stormy backdrop. With each crack of thunder, both Karen and the protagonist felt an increasing sense of unease. They were unaware that nature was about to unleash a reckoning, a culmination of actions that would soon collide with their lives in an unexpected and devastating way. The tree had become more than just wood and leaves. It was now a ticking clock poised to deliver its own brand of revenge. The storm that had been brewing finally erupted with a ferocity that echoed the tension between neighbors. Thunder roared like an angry god, and sheets of rain began to pour from the sky, drenching Maplewood Grove in a chilling deluge. The wind howled, whipping through the streets and sending leaves swirling into a chaotic dance. It was in this tempest that the weakened oak tree, now standing on borrowed time, reached its breaking point. With a deafening crack, the tree began its descent. The sound reverberated through the neighborhood, an ominous report that sent shivers down the spines of anyone within earshot. The protagonist was outside in the rain, helplessly watching as the oak's massive trunk leaned precariously to one side, its roots unable to hold firm against the onslaught of wind and rain. Time seemed to slow as gravity took hold, and the tree began to fall. In that split second, all thoughts of revenge faded. Instead, a primal instinct kicked in. No, the protagonist shouted, but it was too late. The trajectory was set, and the oak was plummeting toward Karen's house with an almost poetic inevitability. The branches, stripped and sharp from her earlier cuts, reached out like skeletal fingers as they sliced through the air. Chaos ensued as the tree crashed into Karen's roof with a thunderous thud, splintering wood and sending debris flying in all directions. Shingles flew off like confetti at a celebration gone wrong, and windows rattled violently before shattering under the impact. A plume of dust and rain-soaked leaves erupted into the air, creating a surreal scene amidst the tempest. Stunned silence gripped the neighborhood for just a heartbeat before pandemonium broke loose. Neighbors rushed out of their homes, eyes wide with disbelief as they witnessed the irony unfolding before them. The very tree Karen had deemed a nuisance now lay across her house, crushing her precious property beneath its weight. Through the chaos, the protagonist felt an odd mixture of relief and sorrow. While part of them wanted to cheer for justice served, another part mourned the loss of something that had once brought beauty to their lives. As frantic calls to emergency services rang out and people rushed to assess damage, it became clear that this event would not only change Karen's life but would. The consequences of crossing boundaries. In the aftermath of the incident, Maplewood Grove buzzed with a mix of shock and curiosity. Whispers filled the streets as neighbors gathered in small clusters, eager to discuss the dramatic turn of events. The oak tree, once a point of contention, had become a catalyst for change within the community, a shared experience that will be talked about for years to come. Some residents viewed the situation through a lens of sympathy for Karen. She didn't mean for it to happen, one neighbor remarked, shaking their head. She just wanted her yard back. This sentiment resonated with those who had been on the receiving end of Karen's strict enforcement of HOA rules, fostering a sense of understanding toward her misguided actions. Yet, as others chimed in, opinions quickly became divided. "I can't believe she took it upon herself to cut that tree," exclaimed another neighbor, her arms crossed in disbelief. What did she expect would happen? The buzz grew louder as people debated whether Karen's behavior warranted sympathy or condemnation. The incident had unearthed underlying tensions that many residents had kept silent, revealing how Karen's past confrontations had left scars in their relationships. Meanwhile, the protagonists found themselves at the center of this swirling conversation. What had once been a solitary struggle against Karen's overreach now transformed into a rallying point for support. Neighbors who had previously avoided confrontation began to express their solidarity, sharing stories of their own run-ins with Karen's strict enforcement. "You stood up for what was right," one neighbor said earnestly, clapping the protagonist on the shoulder. "She went too far this time." As offers of help poured in, whether it was cleaning up debris from the fallen tree or simply lending an ear, the protagonist felt a warmth spread through them. This newfound camaraderie felt like a breath of fresh air after weeks of tension and isolation. Amidst the gossip and divided opinions, one thing was clear: the dynamic within Maplewood Grove was shifting. The oak tree's fall had not just brought down branches. It had also brought neighbors together in unexpected ways, forging alliances and reigniting conversations about community standards and personal boundaries. What once divided them now served as a reminder that unity could emerge from even the most chaotic situations. As the dust settled from the chaotic scene, the reality of the situation began to dawn on both Karen and the protagonist. The fallen oak tree had not only caused physical damage, but also opened the door to a myriad of legal and financial ramifications that neither had fully anticipated. Karen, now faced with a mangled roof and broken windows, scrambled to contact her insurance company. The first call was met with a long hold time, and when she finally reached an agent, she felt a wave of panic. "It's a tree that fell on my house," she explained hurriedly. "But it wasn't my fault. It was overhanging from my neighbor's yard." The agent's response was coldly professional. They would need to assess liability and investigate the circumstances surrounding the tree's fall before any claims could be processed. Meanwhile, the protagonists found themselves grappling with their own concerns. As they began to document the damage done to their property, a few fallen branches and some disturbed landscaping, they considered whether or not to file a claim for any potential loss in property value. However, they were also wary of getting entangled in a legal dispute that could escalate further. Conversations with neighbors revealed that many were eager to support them, but the thought of involving lawyers made them hesitate. The HOA, sensing an opportunity for intervention, began to mobilize as well. They convened an emergency meeting to discuss Karen's unauthorized actions and the implications for community standards. Some members argued that Karen's unilateral decision had jeopardized not just her home but also the HOA's reputation. Others were concerned about setting a precedent. How could they enforce rules if one member felt entitled to act outside of them? As discussions unfolded, it became clear that the HOA would need to take action. They proposed sending a formal letter to Karen outlining potential fines for her breach of HOA guidelines and requiring her to attend a hearing to address her actions. This move stirred mixed reactions. While some supported accountability, others felt it was excessive given the circumstances. In this climate of uncertainty, both Karen and the protagonist navigated their new realities, rooted in fear of legal repercussions and financial burdens. What started as a personal dispute had morphed into a community-wide issue, forcing everyone involved to confront not only their responsibilities, but also the complexities of living together in Maplewood Grove. The fallout from one moment of reckless decision-making had rippled far beyond what any individual could have predicted. In the wake of the incident, the protagonists found themselves in a reflective state, sifting through the emotional debris left behind by the chaos. As they stood in their yard, now cleared of fallen branches, they couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and sadness. The oak tree's absence was palpable, a stark reminder of the conflict that had unfolded and the community dynamics that had shifted as a result. Looking back, the protagonist realized how much they had grown through this ordeal. Once hesitant to confront Karen or assert their own rights, they had learned the importance of standing up for themselves and valuing their home and memories. They had witnessed firsthand how fear could be paralyzing, but also how unity within a community could empower individuals to challenge injustice. The support from neighbors had been unexpected yet uplifting, transforming what had begun as a divisive issue into an opportunity for connection and solidarity. As conversations among residents continued, it became clear that the incident had sparked broader discussions about the HOA's role. Many felt that Karen's actions highlighted flaws in the governance structure. Rules that were meant to protect were being wielded like weapons. Small groups began to form, discussing potential reforms to ensure that no one person could impose their will on others without checks and balances. Ideas floated around about creating more transparent channels for grievances and establishing a mediation process for disputes. The protagonist began attending HOA meetings regularly, eager to engage in these evolving discussions. They felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not just about their tree anymore, but about the future of Maplewood Grove itself. As members debated changes to governance policies, there was a growing consensus that stronger community engagement could prevent future conflicts from escalating. Ultimately, while the loss of the oak tree was felt deeply, it served as a catalyst for positive change within the neighborhood. The protagonist understood that sometimes tragedy could lead to growth not just personally, but collectively as a community. The experience had reshaped their perspective on neighborly relationships and governance in ways they never anticipated. As new ideas took root, they felt hopeful about what lay ahead for Maplewood Grove, a community ready to learn from its past while nurturing a more harmonious future. As the dust settled and life in Maplewood Grove began to return to a semblance of normalcy, the protagonists found themselves reflecting on how quickly things could escalate and change. In the days following the incident, they had shared many conversations with neighbors, all punctuated with laughter and disbelief at how one tree could spark such chaos. It became a running joke among residents. "Next time I have a dispute," one neighbor quipped, "I'll just let my tree do the talking." The irony of it all was not lost on anyone. Karen had sought to take matters into her own hands, convinced she was acting in everyone's best interest, only for her actions to backfire spectacularly. As the protagonist chuckled at the absurdity of the situation, they realized that this incident was a reminder of the delicate balance between community and personal boundaries. Sometimes, in trying to enforce those boundaries too rigidly, one could inadvertently cause more harm than good. Neighbors began playfully referring to the fallen oak as Karen's Tree of Justice, a humorous moniker that lightened the mood around what had been a tense situation. It served as a reminder that while rules were important, so too was compassion and understanding among community members. The image of Karen standing bewildered in front of her dented roof, surrounded by neighbors offering help and support, became a symbol of how taking drastic actions could lead to unexpected consequences, both comical and poignant. As the protagonist looked out over their yard, now filled with new life, fresh flowers planted in honor of the beloved oak, they felt the sense of hopefulness. The experience had forged unexpected bonds among residents and transformed them into advocates for a more collaborative community approach. They understood that while rules could guide behavior, it was kindness and open communication that truly held a neighborhood together. In a world often marked by division, Maplewood Grove emerged stronger, united by shared experiences and lessons learned. As laughter echoed through the streets once more, it became clear, sometimes, it took a little chaos to remind everyone that they were all in this together. A community where trees might fall but friendships would always rise.